Now invite Claire Fan, economist at the Royal Bank of Canada. Claire, good afternoon and thank you for your time. Many had expected a decline in the wake of U.S. tariffs. What's your read on these latest GDP numbers that are coming in?
Right. So I think the decline in sort of the Canadian GDP in April was a bit of a downside surprise, as we would call it. So comparing to consensus estimates that were pre the release today, as well as Statistic Canada's own sort of estimate, preliminary estimate about a month ago, we were looking for 0.1% increase, actually. So number-wise, or headline number-wise, it's actually a bit softer than we were expecting. But I think there are important divergence in terms of sectorial performance that's being masked here.
So let's talk about this sectors. We know that manufacturing itself hasn't seen such a drop since 2021, and data agencies now expecting a drop further. In your view, how far will it damage the sector?
Yeah, so the sector absolutely being the most exposed to international trade headwinds will continue to see a lot of damage coming from U.S. tariffs. We've seen the sector losing over 55,000 jobs this year to date. So, I mean, sort of the negative impact is very obvious. It's also very widely based. No matter where you look at in terms of the subsectors, whether being clothing, fabrics, or food manufacturing, we're seeing declines pretty much everywhere. But outside of that, there is a bit of an interesting dynamic in terms of the sectors that are largely exposed, meaning manufacturing, wholesale sales, that we also saw activities decline, as well as transport and warehousing. But outside of those sectors, if you look at some of the other sectors, for example, arts and entertainment, like you pointed out, as well as retail sales. So these are some of the sectors that are less exposed, perhaps not at all exposed to international tariffs. And these sectors are broadly doing fine, and they're really supporting and offsetting a lot of the losses that we're seeing in some of these other industrial sectors.
Claire, you spoke about jobs. We know that unemployment also went up in May, a slight uptick there. Do you see that continue, looking at how there is still a little bit of uncertainty of what's going to happen with the tariffs?
Right. So our unemployment rate forecast is for it to peak around 7.1, which, mind you, is not very far from the 7% that it already hit in May. But the big story really is that there is going to be potentially more deterioration in the labor market. But similar to the GDP data that we saw this morning, we largely expected to be at this juncture contained and very localized in the sectors in the region, namely Southern Ontario, where manufacturing plays a really big part, where it takes a really large share out of the workforce, local workforce. So that's really the story that we're trying to highlight there, that, because of how targeted tariffs has been in terms of just sort of the steel and aluminum sectors that are seeing more targeted measures as well, and a small share of non-CUSMA, where USMCA compliant trade. We really expect broadly the bleed in both labor market and the economy to be relatively contained.
Okay.
And early data that we're looking at, for example, job openings from Indeed.com, largely, corroborate with that outlook.
There is something else I want to pick your brains on. A big development that happened last night, though, Claire. We know that Bill C-5 passed in the Senate last night. This is a bill, now a law, of course, to fast-track major projects in the country. Interprovincial trade barriers also gradually being lifted now. How hopeful are you for the future outlook of the economy, looking at what has happened just last night?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really sort of encouraging because, there were a lot of talks around productivity challenges, which has been a longstanding issue. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of low-hanging fruits, so-called, that we can pluck. And these interprovincial trade barriers is, if anything, probably the biggest one. So it's definitely encouraging to see efforts broadly moving forward in terms of breaking these barriers. But as we've highlighted before, a lot of these barriers also have to do with differences in regulations and such. So essentially, it's going to take time. Like, changes are not going to happen overnight, but we're already seeing damages from the trade war. So in the near term, it's unlikely the benefits from what we're seeing in terms of, the bill that you just talked about is going to completely offset the damage on the economy. But broadly, these are definitely good things and things that we're hoping to see in terms of longer run productivity growth in the Canadian economy.
Right. Claire Fan, economist at the Royal Bank of Canada. Appreciate your time, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks.